So we will slowly start. Okay. Hello, everyone. Before we start, I would like to say a few things. English language is not my main language. If I made a mistake, I'm sorry about that. I'm Ronay Gökdemir. I am the chairperson of the board at Women's State of Solidarity Association. I would like to briefly talk about why we are organized and why we need these works. We are organized because ideas such as raising awareness against gender inequality, reaching more individuals, trying to raise awareness, and trying to create a safe space for this segment brought us together. Because we are exposed to sexual assault and harassment on the street, mobbing at work, all kinds of male violence at home, indirect and direct gender-based discrimination, and violation of rights every day. Perpetrators of gender-based violence are welcomed in court. No deterrent punishments are given. We are organizing to fight all kinds of violence and discrimination against women, LGBTI+, and children.
Okan sesi açamamamın nedeni bunun açık olması.
We came together in order to understand better all kinds of violence that we are exposed to in every aspect of our daily life, either unconsciously or consciously, and to establish a line of struggle. As women who were born in the Kurdish geography and grow up with the weight of living in this geography, we are aware that Kurdish woman identity means being the other of the other. Many women's organizations were closed in Diyarbakir and the region, especially with the statutory decrees in 2016 and later, by appointing trustees to institutions providing services under municipalities, places where women could receive services and support were rendered dysfunctional. Although this disadvantage affects all non-governmental organizations, considering the regional dynamics and the target group of the government, we can say that it has affected Kurdish women and the region where Kurdish women live as the majority. In this context, many women's associations and organizations were either closed down or women who were members of these associations and organizations were arrested. It is precisely for these reasons that the Women's State of Solidarity Association was established in Diyarbakir in 2018. Without further ado, I call upon our project coordinator, dear Nevros Fidan, to speak about our project briefly and convey what we have done so far.
Hun bekheratın in Kurdish. Welcome. Hoş geldiniz. Hi everyone. My name is Nevros. I am responsible for the general coordination of Women's State of Solidarity and Gender Academy. I'm so happy to be here and share this ambience with you all. We are an amateur group. We are not professional. So forgive us if we have any mistakes about talking or the other things. In Turkish, when we try to explain something like that, we say sürçülisan ettiysek affola. So let me tell you about our association, what we have done until today. The Kahter, we call it like the Kahter, a Women's State of Solidarity, was established on the 3rd of September in 2018. And since then, it has conducted capacity building trainings for its members. And with this, we provide training on sexual health and dating violence to young women. We created women's circles at regular intervals and had conversations about issues we had difficulty in these circles and what we want to share. Actually, these circles was about the difficulties that we had in our normal life. It was not organized, but sometimes we were calling each other and we were coming together and talking about the difficulties. We held the first festival of struggling violence against women in Diyarbakir on the 20th, between the 20th and 25th of November in 2019. With this, we just reached to many people, and Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung just founded us, and we had many physical activities such as dance, theater, seminars during this festival. And we have completed our Combating Sexual Violence and Solidarity Network project with the contribution of invaluable trainers And we have added important phone numbers, institutions, contacts, and addresses in the cities where women are located in the Solidarity network on our website. Actually, if you go to our website, like www.dakahtar.com, you can see that Solidarity network on our website. Also, our website has 3 languages like Kurdish, Turkish, and English. After this, we had second festival of struggling violence against women. It was online during COVID-19. We had this online. It was again between the 20th and 25th of November in 2020. And Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung again just founded us. During this time, also we have uploaded the glossary of concepts. On our Instagram, you can see like posts. We shared them like also post stories, and also our website, you can see again them in 3 languages. And as of June 1, 2021, we started to run our women networks, Women News Network project with support of Rosa Luxemburg Stiftung together. I know you just heard that name too much, but we had many projects with them. That's why I am also telling that many times. And let's come to our Gender Academy. If I want to talk about it, on May 1, 2021, we started our Gender Academy project with the support of European Endowment of Democracy. The Academy aims to develop egalitarian attitudes and behaviors on gender issues by increasing knowledge and skills to combat gender inequality, gender-based violence, and patriarchy. And on June 23, 2021, we held our first training. It was the women's movement in the world with Alev Özkazanç. We also thank to Alev Özkazanç from here again. And on July 10, 2021, we held our second training with the title of History of Women's Movement in Turkey with dear Aksubora. Also, we thank to Aksubora from here again. And today, we are here with dear Judith Butler and Zeynep Gambeti to talk about queer theory. We will do queer theory training with our participants, but we wanted to have it with everybody. And Deniz Kureta and Ceren Öztürk will accompany us for simultaneously translation tonight. Before just starting, I would like to tell our participants about Judith Butler and Zeynep Gambeti. Then we will listen to you. Maybe I talked too much, I'm sorry for that, but I just want to give information to the participants. Judith Butler was born on February 24, 1956 in Ohio, USA. Butler is a professor of philosophy at the University of California, Berkeley, as well as a professor of rhetoric and comparative literature. Judith Butler received her PhD in psychology from Yale University in 1984, which was published in 20th Century France and Hegelian Reflections. Butler is actually best known with books Gender Trouble, Feminism, and Subversion of Identity. And I would like to tell also about Zeynep Gambeti. Zeynep Gambeti is an associate professor of political theory at Boğaziçi University. She obtained her PhD at the University of Paris in 1999. Her work focuses on collective agency ethics and public space. She has carried out extensive research on the transformation of the conflict between the Turkish state and the Kurdish movement, with particular emphasis on space as a vector of relationality. I'm sorry. Normally I can speak English, but just I'm so excited. And now I would like to welcome you all again and call upon dear Zeynep Gambeti and dear Judith Butler. Thank you for being here with us today. We hope it will be a great night for all of us. And for now, see you.
So thank you, Nevros and Rana, for this introduction, very generous introduction. I'm also very happy to be with you and be with Judith Butler. I wish we were at Diyarbakir all together. It is a city that is beloved to me. I do sort of want to extend my solidarities and my admiration to the work that you are doing in Diyarbakir. I know that you are courageous because you are fighting on two fronts or three or four. You already said that, Rona. You said we are the other of the other. So you were fighting not only against patriarchy, violence, discrimination, perhaps tradition, the very rigid binary constructions of gender, but also against the very mighty Turkish state, which, of course, sort of, in a way, created the movement, the women's movement, the struggle of the women's movement that you have now in Diyarbakir. I'm very admirative of it. Let's me just, express this to you, express my solidarity and thanks. And also my thanks to Judith Butler for accepting this invitation. She has probably never been to the region, although I know she would like to. So we are hoping to welcome you in person next time, but you are also a very courageous person, so it is an honor to be with you, not only as an intellectual and theorist, but I know as a political activist. And so I'm looking very much forward to listening to your talk. Thanks again.
Well, thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm sorry I am not there. It is always a pleasure to talk and think with Zeynep Gambetti, who has been, for me, a treasured collaborator and a soulmate in matters political and global. And I am, in fact, indebted to Zeynep for teaching me much of what I know about the Kurdish situation and putting it on the map of our political world. As you know, the solidarities in the U.S. and in Europe with the Kurdish struggle are deep, and yet there is always this problem of education, of making sure people understand what's happening in the region, what the activisms are, the specific situation of women, and the history and power of Kurdish feminism, which my colleague Angela Davis is constantly citing. I hope to become more knowledgeable and more helpful in time. And I thank you so much for inviting me in this way. And maybe one day we will meet together. I hope that becomes possible before too long. I wanted to speak a little bit today about queer theory. It's a strange term, queer theory. Why? What? Do feminists need this? Does the women's movement need this? What is the relationship between the women's movement and queer theory? Well, I would suggest, first of all, that queer is odd and strange and perplexing because queer is an English term which used to mean awkward or not quite what is expected. Something was queer if it was odd. Something was queer if it was enigmatic in some way, that you couldn't immediately know that's queer, that's odd, that's strange. So it was a term like that in the British history of the word. And I would say in the late 19th century, it sometimes referred to people who were gay or who seemed gay. Men who were effeminate were considered queer. And by the time I was growing up in the 1960s, it was an insult. Like if you called someone queer, you were saying that they were not right, they were not straight, they were not normal. that and people who were queer were harassed and bullied, and sometimes were the subject of violence on the street or in the home. So queer was a stigma, it was a term that stigmatized people, and people were afraid to be called queer. The last thing you wanted as a kid like me was to be called queer, because that was a way of marking someone for harassment if you called them that. And then it seems to me that the term was taken up in the late 1980s as a term that gay and lesbian people could own. They could use it for their own purposes. And so they took the term and they sought to change it from an insult to a term of self-affirmation. I am queer. We are queer. We are everywhere. Queer nation was an enormously important group, social activism, political activism. So the idea was to take the term that hurts you and to turn it and make it collectively into a term that affirms your existence and affirms your community. So now people don't even remember that queer was an insult. Now it is a way of marking affiliation, solidarity, perhaps also a critique of what we could call heteronormativity. Now, heteronormativity sounds like a very long word that academics make up to describe something relatively simple. So let me just take a moment to say, what is heteronormativity? It is the idea that everyone can be explained within the heterosexual framework. There's a man, a woman, men desire women, women desire men. There is a presumptive heterosexuality to all social relations. And there's a further thought, which is that if you are a woman, you will desire a man. And if you are a man, you will desire a woman, because that is how things work. That is the way things are. That's the natural order of society. Heteronormativity assumes that your gender is positioned in relation to heterosexuality and that your desire is heterosexual. It's not bisexual, it's not lesbian, it's not gay, it's not fluctuating. People sometimes have long histories. People my age have long histories, it's very hard sometimes for the identity to describe the whole history. So, sometimes we stand back from the category. But the critique of heteronormativity is a critique of the idea that it is imperative, it is normative, it is obligatory for a man, in order to be a man, to desire a woman, for a woman, in order to be a woman, to desire a man. So this kind of compulsory framework became the object of criticism or critique. And within the initial stages of queer theory, that particular framework was called into question. Why do we think that? Now, there are I'll say two more points and then break so that Zainab can come in and maybe I can see if you're following. I hope I'm not going too quickly. At the beginning of something called queer theory.
Orada dedim ki hatta adam bunu fark ediyorum Kızılay'da ya aslında. Burası da merkezi. Aynı yani.
Sorry for the technical problem.
All right. I don't know how to distinguish between a significant criticism and somebody's kitchen table talk. So, at the beginning of queer theory, there were maybe two different directions that were interrelated. One that belonged to Eve Sedgwick and many of her students, like Jose Munoz. And she said, look, we talk about heterosexuality as if it's this reality, as if the whole world is heterosexual and it's the only framework within which we can understand gender and sexuality. But she said, look closely. Very often a heterosexual relationship is defined in relationship to a set of homosexual desires, that very often there's a triangulation in heterosexuality, or there's something in heterosexuality that's not quite as normative as it's supposed to be, right? And that could be that men are sometimes in a sexually subservient position, or it could be that there's a relationship to a woman that a straight woman has that is on a border. Is that sexual? Is it not sexual? Maybe Sedgwick said we can call that homosocial, a very important term. But what concerned her most was what she called homosociality among men. And that's the idea that men, straight men, heterosexual men, very often live with a prohibition on gay sex. They do not have sex with each other, at least not in any way that can be seen or recognized publicly. And yet they have deep sexual bonds with each other. And their sexual bond is disavowed, it's denied. At the same time, it can be lived out in forms of masculinism, even in the army. So what is a homosocial institution? Well, very often armies that are exclusively male, and most armies are, as you know, have homosocial bonds. These men are attached to each other. There's even a sexual element to it, even though they will not act on it, or if they do act, they do not avow or recognize the action they perform. So her view was that straight men are internally conflicted, that they're always negotiating homosexuality, and that straight women too, even though they may feel themselves to be clearly and unambiguously straight, have a relationship to female homosexuality that they negotiate in their relationships, and that we are complexly related to each other, the hetero-homo divide. She didn't think that there were heterosexuals over here and homosexuals over here. She thought there was a connection between them. And that would also go for lesbian and gay people. Do we have no relationship to heterosexuality? Are we absolutely separate? Or are we in some ways bound together in ways that may be disturbing or may not actually make our identities as clear as they are supposed to be in the sociological literature? So I've introduced, I think, the idea of heteronormativity and the idea of the homo-hetero divide. And that's, in some ways, those are two concepts that are fundamental to queer theory. Maybe I'll just add one more, which is associated with my early work, which is the idea that gender, there are men and there are women, and you are a women's group, so you must have an idea of what it is to be a woman. We could say women have certain biological features, or we could say, and by the way, there's some complexity there. There's a spectrum. What is a woman? I mean, not all women reproduce, not all women can reproduce. Women who are too old cannot reproduce. Girls who are too young cannot reproduce. Many women cannot reproduce. Why would we define reproduction as the defining character of women? Many women do not want to reproduce. They are women. So delinking reproduction from what it is to be a woman a feminist precept. It's a very important feminist precept in my view. Not everyone agrees, but in my view, yes. And this is important because what it does is it separates the idea of your sexuality, your desire, your practices. Are they reproductive? Are they not reproductive? That's a sphere of choice. That's a sphere of historical possibility. That's a sphere of different physical capacities that we have. But to be a woman is not necessarily to reproduce. That separation of gender and sexual practice or sexual economy is an important one, both for feminism and for queer theory. It is, in fact, a point of contact between the two. But I would go, I think, a little further and say that if we question this idea that all sexual relations can be understood within the heteronormative framework, to be a man is to want a woman, to be a woman is to want a man, then when we start to question that, gender itself falls apart and sexuality becomes more complex. You can be a man and want another man. You can be a man and want both men and women and work that out in your life. You can be a woman and desire men or very specific kinds of men, only those kinds, or desire no one, perfectly legitimate, especially in this world, or desire women, but not all women, but maybe this kind of woman, or maybe only that woman, that one woman. Right? I mean, sexuality can go in many different directions. It's not a straight path. It's not a straight path. So if sexuality is not a straight path, it deviates this way and that, and it is queer. So queer is also a way of describing the deviating path of sexuality. It goes this way and that. It doesn't follow a straight line. The psychologists say, oh, when you're 5, you desire this way, and when you're 12, your sexual development takes this form, and then you move to another stage, and then finally you end up in marriage and reproducing, and that's the ultimate. So that developmental path, which is heteronormative, right, which teaches us how to be straight and, coherent gender. I am a woman, I am a man, I desire heterosexually and only so, and my desire is contained within the institution of marriage, which is dedicated to reproduction. That straight path, which some people love, good, they should have that path, beautiful, have the path. But that straight path is not everybody's path. The deviations are queer. Anyone who deviates from that is queer or is on a queer trajectory. Straight woman who is married does not want children. That's good. That's fine. That's beautiful. That's a feminist freedom, but it's also a queer path. And we think queer does not necessarily mean gay. It does not necessarily mean lesbian. It means deviating from the straight path, from that normative idea of what we are supposed to be, what gender we're supposed to be, and what sexuality we're supposed to have or express. So man and woman are categories that sometimes can constrain us, especially if we feel that we don't conform to the ideas of what a woman is. We don't conform to the ideas of what a man is. I myself am technically and legally now non-binary. I guess I had to be. There was no way I wasn't going to be. I think I helped make up the term. So in the end, I had to take it, which is very odd because it's not an identity exactly. It's a way of marking the fact that one does not fully conform to these norms, and the language one has for one's gender is complex or boring or non-conforming in some way. So we have terms like gender queer, not conforming to the norms of gender that exist. Genderqueer can be non-binary. There are many ways of being trans. We have a proliferation of categories that seek to describe gender and its history and its complexity that go way beyond the binary frame of man and woman, which, as I hope I made clear, belongs to the heteronormative framework that we are trying to disturb and unsettle and open up. Why do we do this? Because we want to play, or do we do this because it's a luxury? We have nothing better to do. We have no real struggles. No, we do this because people suffer. They are pathologized for their gender. They do not conform. They're sent to prison. They're pathologized by psychiatry. They're criminalized by the law. They are being denied basic rights in Romania and Poland and Hungary. Their lives cannot be rules. There is an attack on gender that is happening throughout the world, in Brazil, in Argentina, in Colombia, and also in the United States. People should be able to live and breathe freely. They should be able to move on the street without harassment. They should be able to live their lives with the people they love without being criminalized. They should be able to represent their lives and their wishes in culture, in music, in dance, in photography and film and literature and philosophy without censorship. So it is a struggle for freedom, and it is a struggle for equality, and it is also a struggle for justice. So I'll stop there and see where we are and whether I have made sense. I hope that you could follow me and that I did not speak too quickly.
Can I say something? On the chat, friends are writing something. I will just collect the questions, and I will give the questions to Zeynep Gambetti at the end of the session. For now, for me, it's perfect. I mean, you are explaining it slowly by giving examples. Just sometimes it can be about internet. Your voice is going and coming back. I just wanted to mention about that. And I am giving the word to Zeynep Gambetti.
There was a few places where your voice just went, but we could follow. That doesn't matter. I just want to perhaps urge you to continue by asking you some questions, because you did sort of expose the general ways in which our genders, sexualities, desires are constructed. But perhaps could you touch upon what kind of power and subjugation, forms of subjugation are at play? Because sometimes queer is understood, as you know, as some sort of play, whereas you said it at the end that it is a struggle for freedom, that it is a struggle for equality, because there is a fierce a power sort of pattern that obliges us to conform to the binary construction of gender and sexuality, and why queer would be liberating. Perhaps could you follow that line so that the sense of why queer is a freeing, liberating path would be clear to our audience?
Perhaps, can you hear me better? Is it okay? I just changed the microphone.
It's perfect, yeah, thank you.
Okay. Please interrupt me and ask me to repeat if for some reason the microphone goes away. First of all, what's perhaps important to understand is that queer is not an identity. Some people say I am queer. And that's become more common, but well, my generation, queer was never an identity. In fact, we were worried about identity as the precondition of membership in any given group. The idea was we shouldn't police each other. We shouldn't say, oh, are you really lesbian? Are you really gay? Or I don't think you're really gay. Or someone told me a story about you, so you're not really a lesbian. You know, we didn't want that kind of policing of identity. What we wanted in both Queer Nation and ACT UP were forms of alliance and solidarity. So what people sometimes tend not to see about queer is that it is a theory and practice of solidarity and alliance, that in some ways that is its political aim. So in our activism, for instance, in the ACT UP movement, when we were seeking to pressure the government to produce more medications that could help people with HIV, or we were pressuring the government to educate people on how HIV is transmitted. We were in alliance with a number of groups, all of whom were affected disproportionately, very seriously by the AIDS crisis. They were losing members of their community, and that included women, sex workers, it included people who take drugs, it included poor people who were unhoused. And it was, but it also included in the United States a number of churches and a number of African American and Latinx communities who were suffering disproportionately because they did not have access to healthcare or health education. And we see this again in the pandemic. So the solidarities were strong and wide, but we didn't ask, what is your sexuality? We asked, are you with us? Are you against homophobia? Are you in favor of what we call sexual justice? That is to say, the idea that people should not be left to die because they are gay or lesbian or bisexual or non-conforming with heteronormative family situations. So it's extremely important that queer meant affiliation. In fact, anyone who was willing to stand up against homophobia was part of the alliance. We didn't really care who you sleep with or how you identify your sexuality. And in some ways, we separated from the LGBT community, not that it was LGB then, right? Late 80s, early 90s, lesbian, gay, bisexual. We separated from them because they were identity-based and we were community-based. We were about solidarities. We were about trying to rethink the interconnection among a number of minority communities as they were struggling to get the medical treatments they needed in order to live. Now, of course, I mean, you described your cultural events this summer and in the last months. You know, we had our performances, we had our music, we had our drag shows, we had many flamboyant ways of playing to bring public attention to what is happening. And of course, many transgender people are very involved in performances of various kinds or want to appear in public and be known for who they are. So appearing in public was also an important aspect of this mobilization. And there is some playfulness because, as you know, if you want to survive as a social movement, when other people want you dead, when other people want you dead, when there is a genocidal politics against you, as you all know, you need to find ways of regenerating your life, your desires, your aims, your community, right? You can't just be suffering. You must also regenerate the life of the community. So of course there are parties and there's play and there's demos and all of that that show the ways in which these very constraining norms can be contested and reformulated. But it's for the purposes of asserting freedom and freedom in public, freedom to live in public with one's pleasure, one's desire, without shame, without fear, without violence. So I think one has to perhaps put it in that way. Of course, you know, there are different ways of thinking about queer today that maybe differ from what I'm saying now, but for me, the most important are, for instance, queers for economic justice, very important group. Mainly socialist or Marxist queers who are very concerned with the distribution of food, the right to shelter, the right to health care, opposing capitalism, its destruction of the environment, its abandonment of workers. So we have many queer Marxists. There's queer Marxists who work on China. There's queer Marxists who work in the UK. There's queer Marxists in Italy. And in France and throughout the United States. So that's been a very strong conjunction in recent years. But to be involved in queer Marxism, as opposed to simply Marxism, is to ally in certain ways and not to forget that discrimination and violence on the basis of gender, discrimination and violence on the basis of sexuality is part of the struggle. It's not secondary. It's right there in the economics of the household and the economics of the nation. Because sometimes, as you know, Marxists will say that, well, there's economic oppression and then there's cultural oppression as a secondary problem, and gay, lesbian stuff, or feminism even, is secondary. No. The household is the basic economic unit of any nation. The household is organized through heteronormativity. Nations reproduce themselves and their demographic politics depend on reproduction happening along certain lines. That reliance on the reproduction of the household and the nation for any nationalist nation depends fundamentally on organizing and regulating the family and sexuality. So this is a moment, I would say, where the queer perspective works with the feminist perspective and the Marxist one to seek to not only produce a more livable life for gay, lesbian, bi, asexual people, but also to show that sexuality and gender are part of the very economic structure of society.
There was a question in the chat. A part of your talk was sort of somehow less understood because of the technical problems, the sound problems, and that someone from the audience actually just wants you to perhaps come back to that. And I was thinking perhaps that part was very important for the context in which this talk is taking place. That is societies where patriarchal structures are very strong and the construct of masculinity is very strong and sort of reflects in a lot of places. So the question was, could you briefly explain again that idea of homosociality sort of compensating for the perhaps missed alternative or foreclosed alternative for heteronormative men?
Well, as you know, in many armies throughout the world, armies that are composed mainly of men, there is a prohibition on homosexual activity. Sometimes that prohibition is explicit. If you engage in homosexual activity, you are thrown out of the army. Sometimes it's implicit. If you engage in that, or you seek to engage in gay sex of one kind or another, you will be shunned or shamed, bullied, harassed, or punished. So one question is, how is it that the unity of the masculine army, the coherence, the internal coherence of a masculine army depends on the denial of homosexuality, the prohibition, at the same time that it talks about these bonds between men, these important bonds that make the army coherent, that help the army to act efficiently. So there is always, I believe, and we could check other languages to see how this works, but there is the idea of social coherence, or the masculine bond within the military, which is homosocial. So homosocial, not homosexual. They may not actually be having sex with each other, but there's homosocial. They are connected with one another, and whatever sexuality may be between them is resolved into militarism and solidarity with one another as men, as militarists, as standing for the state, as defending the state, as identifying with the state, but they are bonded together. Well, is the homosexuality that they repress part of that very bond? In other words, does the homosexuality really go away? Is it just pushed out? No, none of us have that desire, nobody here. Or is it contained and used to bond men together, right? In other words, they deny the homosexuality, at the same time they use it, that they use that homoerotic bond to produce a masculine solidarity that then engages in militarism as a way of showing their masculinity and both denying and mobilizing their homosexuality. It's a complex thought, but what I'm trying to suggest is that even when in armies homosexuality is prohibited, it comes back in as part of the masculine social bond that makes militarism even more intense, because they have something to prove. The more they work together, the more the heightened that homoerotic bond could be. So the hypermasculinism then continues to deny what they are doing. There's an internal contradiction, we might say, in masculine social units like the army.
But of course, we can also talk about homosociality among women, right?
Yes.
So there's also the counterpart that is also that we can ponder. Do you think what would you say about that homosocial bond? What does it produce? Is there a specific social institution that it produces, like the army? Is there a parallel between the two?
Well, I think we can find those bonds in sports. We can find them in advertising. We can find them in women's activities that are meant to support men. At the same time, there may well be a current that runs through those women's communities that is not really about the men. So I think it can work in a variety of ways. I've always been interested in how young women look at look at famous models in magazines, and on the one hand they are identifying, oh, I want to be that, but to what extent is there perhaps some also kind of desire that is being reworked or denied and transformed in that relationship to spectacular forms of femininity?
But I guess we could say, if we can continue this line of thought, I guess it the sort of repressing of homosexuality in men most usually translates into some form of solidarity and violence. Can we say that? Because we could also bring up the question of why it is so difficult for men then to admit of that potential homosexuality and to let go of that masculinity. So there is this construction of masculinity that is related to
Sen hangisi? Anahtar var mı
I'm so
annemde
sorry.
de?
I'm just gonna
Anne
yeah, that was
it's interesting how everybody's household comes in at one point or another.
exactly.
This is our
I'm sorry,
Zoom world.
sometimes we can have this kind of things. And by the way, while you are talking, I'm taking my notes. There are a couple of questions. Thank you for Zeynep Gambati. She's exactly translating them at the time. But if she misses them, I'm just collecting them and I will send her to ask you later.
Okay, you give us the time, Nevros. So should we go to the Q&A? Should we continue a bit, sort of speaking about queer theory, for instance, the relationship between queer theory or queer activism and feminism?
Actually,
maybe that's the last point, or should we go on to the Q&A session?
If you ask to participants and to us, we will continue till the morning. It doesn't matter for us. But for now, we can continue. And I will also just raise my hand or say, can we start to the questions? Okay, thank you.
Okay, yeah, sorry. Go ahead, Judith.
I guess what worries me some is that there are some versions of feminism that also believe that the queer theory, not queer theory, but queer movements are a distraction, or that they take that they will weaken feminism. And of course, there are arguments that some feminists have made that trans women are not women or trans men are not men. And they are trying, in my view, to police the category of gender. They think they own the category of gender. And they believe it's being stolen by men who they refuse to recognize as women for their own purposes, and that this is another strategy of domination. Now, I disagree with this point of view. I think it's a very destructive point of view. And as you could predict, I believe that this point of view not only polices gender, but it also breaks solidarity precisely when we need broader forms of solidarity. Because the people who are arguing against gender, the anti-gender movement, is attacking women and reproductive rights. It's attacking trans people. It's attacking LGBTQI education. It's not making a distinction among us. It's attacking all of us. And we would be very foolish to divide ourselves and have sectarian debates, sometimes very vicious, at the precise moment when we need broad and broadening forms of solidarity that are not just located in the US or the UK, but are trans-regional. And because this is a global issue, and global solidarity alone will be the one that that prevails. And feminism is right at the center of this. right? The same people who want to deny a woman's right to reproductive freedom, or that believe that all women belong in the home as wives, tending to children, those same people who believe that also are attacking trans, queer, LGBTQ people and do not want them to have free and open spaces to congregate, right? That's happening in Poland. That's happening in Romania. And the Danish government is trying to pass a law that says that teaching about gender, all of these matters we have discussed, should be prohibited from the schools. So this is a huge challenge for us right now. And it's important that we have a global movement that doesn't just reflect the interests of one part of the world, but that is sensitive to the struggles on the ground in various regions. We're glad to take questions, or I don't know.
Maybe
Zeynep, what do you think?
Yeah, I think there are so many questions. Maybe
Yes,
we could
I can
go-
just send them exactly right now to dear Zeynep Gambeti.
Okay.
Done, I sent them. Some of them are in English, some of them are just Turkish.
Okay, super. So I'll just hepsi bu kadar mı bu arada Nevroz? Hepsine baktın mı? Okay, let me start with the first one and let's see how it goes. Should I ask one by one, or should I ask like a couple of questions and you can like give a more, how do you feel more comfortable, Judith?
I can handle two at once, but maybe three you never know.
Okay. So the first big question is, maybe you could go for one question in this case, because is the future non-binary? Is one question.
I don't imagine a world in which there is no gender, or in which there's so many genders. It's just a huge, infinite field of possibility. I think some people really love the gender they were born with, just love it, just love being a girl, want to be a woman, are very happy with it. It expresses something important to them. They want to live it. They're enjoying it. They should have that, right? Nobody should take that away. At the same time, for those of us who don't conform to that and have no pleasure there, or who find their pleasure elsewhere, or who find their freedom and their capacity to live and breathe in a different gender formation, they should be given their space. So I do think the future is complex. That may well be traditional families reproducing for people who love that and want that, or who feel like it is their obligation and duty and don't want that to be contested. That's fine, as long as they do not say this is the only possible social form. The minute they say this is the only possible social form, they are telling other people that they must conform to unlivable social arrangements. And they are refusing to allow them to produce social arrangements that make life livable. That is not okay. So that's the only answer I have to that.
I didn't, okay, that was me. In geographies are like ours, says one member of the audience. When it comes to political struggles, how can we sort of proceed with these struggles without establishing a hierarchy or a sort of list of priorities or urgencies between them? How can we go about combining these struggles or aligning these struggles? As the other question. And do you want another question here?
That's okay.
Okay, so is binary transsexuality reproducing gender roles?
Cool. Okay. Well, first of all, on the question of priorities, it depends what the struggle is. I think no one can prescribe this from the outside, right? I mean, if you are facing state violence, as you are, if you are trying to preserve the life of your community and gain autonomy politically, culturally, and to stave off genocidal politics that are directed against you, then of course that is the framework. And the struggles are have to be connected with that framework in some way. So, for instance, in Palestine, the different queer struggles against occupation, the queer struggles against apartheid, the queer struggles against state violence are linked with the struggles on the ground against homophobia and against violence against women. And how you link them is this, that is for people who are on the ground and in the struggle. No one can tell you exactly how to link them, but it is a question of not necessarily thinking about what's primary and what's secondary, but how to make a more complex view of what is primary. State violence. What does that have to do with masculinism? State violence. What does it have to do with the regulation of the family and the restriction of freedom in the public sphere and in private life? Like, what are the permutations of state violence? How do we rethink it so that gender and sexuality are not secondary, but part of its very operation? And now the second question was great, but I'm not remembering.
Yeah.
Tell me again.
Okay. No, let me repeat it because it had a second part. Is binary transsexuality reproducing gender roles? Can we say transsexuality is divided into two, as binary transsexuality and non-binary transsexuality in general?
Well, it's a complex field and it has a variety of positions in it, and we should not be surprised, right? There's not like one idea of what it is to be trans or transgender. Transsexual tends to be a medical term. Some people still use it, others push it away because it's a diagnosis. It feels psychiatric as a term. Transgender is maybe more common, or trans, just, without all of that. I would say that even if it reproduces gender norms, some of it, why not? That should not be alarming, because we are all reproducing gender norms. And it's in the reproduction of gender norms that we make our changes, right? Trans men are reimagining masculinity. Yes, they want to be masculine. And some of them absolutely like the binary framework. They just are on the wrong side of the binary. Just put me over here as a man. But at the same time, in reproducing then the gender norms of masculinity, there are some changes, right? Trans men, are they as violent as men who are assigned maleness at birth? Shall we think about that? They are expressing a legal freedom for themselves, which is an important activist moment, and they are making a change that the world has told them is not possible, and that the legal and psychiatric associations are telling them too often is not possible. Some of them are okay. So I think we need to ask what differences emerge within masculinity, what differences emerge within femininity, right? A trans woman with a low voice who is showing that she is trans, in other words, who's not trying to cover up the transition, but who's announcing the transition. I made this transition. I'm in transition. The marks of transition are in me and part of how I understand myself and show myself. That's different. She's not just conforming to a norm. She's actually telling us something about how norms are made and how they are remade. So reproduction for me is not the same as ratification or reconsolidation of gender norms. We are all reproducing, and sometimes the most radical changes take place in the course of reproducing gender norms. We reproduce them in a different direction, in a more humane direction.
Thanks. There was so there was a question about performativity. I mean, it was about, do you think that there's a risk of defaulting to essentialist ideas about gender when we use the performativity approach? If so, how can we avoid that? I guess you sort of answered that right now, right? Reproduction. But would you like to add something? I mean, when we perform, we're not necessarily ratifying a gender, but do you want to comment on that?
Sure. You know, some people think that the performativity of gender means you're free to do whatever you want. And sometimes it looks a little bit like market freedom, like, oh, I can choose to dress this way, or I can choose to appear this way, and I'm an individual expressing my personal liberty. And yes, it can be like that, but it can also be trying to bring a new reality into existence, trying to change the terms of social reality. In other words, when there are breakthrough moments, a woman takes on a powerful role, a Black or brown person takes on an important role in global governance. There are breakthrough moments where the idea of what a woman is, the idea of what it is to be Turkish or Kurdish or Israeli or South African, absolutely, it changes. And there's a new conception that emerges. That's a moment of performativity. That means we have taken existing concepts, conventions, images, norms, embodied them, and shown that it can mean something new, and it can mean something that is not the same as what the oppressors say we are. So every time we speak up against an oppressive version of who we are, and we seize the power of self-definition or political self-determination, we are asserting ourselves in a new way and seeking to make a new reality in the world. It's not fake. It's new, but it's not fake. It's only fake from the perspective that we already know what's real, right? If we already think, oh, we know what it is to be a gender, and here these people are doing things that suggest gender can be different, we call them fake in order to reaffirm the status quo. But if, in fact, people are producing a new idea of what it is to be a woman, which is part of feminism, and it's also part of queer theory, right? New lived realities, new social realities, they're bringing that into being. That's performativity. That's not an idealism. That is a practice, and usually a collective one, to insist upon a new definition of a group and how they should be seen and how they should be regarded and named and treated. So that is absolutely crucial for any social movement that is combating deeply demonizing or false representations of who they are, right? You know this, right? Every act of political self-determination gets renamed as terrorism. It's like, oh, how do you fight that? How do you fight that, right? I mean, that is not an idealist problem. That's a real political problem in discourse and in reality. But it would be a radical moment when the world starts to understand perfectly well that terrorist is a false accusation, a false label, a false name. where the terms of Kurdish self-definition become powerful and Kurdish women's self-definition becomes powerful and is able to actually produce a new social reality. We have to, even if we're Marxists, if we're not Marxists, we have to believe that the terms of social reality can change. Otherwise, we are lost. There's no hope. So that's performativity. It's not idealist and it's not fake and it's not voluntarist. It's a struggle to change the terms of gender, to change the terms by which the Kurds are represented in the world. That's a struggle. It has to happen on many different levels. It's not just a question of how you appear as a body on the street. That might be part of it, but that's not the only model. It's not the only example.
There were a couple of questions about queer theory, non-binary, gender constructs, and religion. Do you want to comment on it? There was a great question about, you know, how in a Quran courses here in Turkey, boys and girls get to be separated from each other. So would you like to comment a bit more on the relationship?
Yes, I mean, I think we can point to many orthodox conservative versions of religion that do insist on the gender binary and school their children to become proper men and proper women. They underscore the hierarchy. They give men enormous powers. They sequester women. It happens in Christianity. It happens in Islam. It happens in Judaism. It certainly happens in Confucianism. And there's actually a fight in China about trying to bring back other forms of religion that would unsettle the masculinist assumptions that Confucianism has assumed within modernity. At the same time, many religious groups have come out in favor of LGBTQI rights and feminism, and we have progressive versions of every religion. So in my view, the problem is not religion, the problem is orthodoxy. So I would ask, and for me, we live in a world that will always be in part secular and in part religious. So we need those who are inside religious communities to open up those terms and struggle for gender equality and gender freedom, for sexual equality and sexual freedom.
And there's a question on gender-based violence. That is, all forms of gender-based violence are increasing, that sexual, psychological, physical, economic in Turkey, the question goes. As we all know, gender-based violence is rooted in power relations. And you two have also touched upon the power relations in relation to queer theory. So do you think queer theory would have any role in transforming the way gender-based violence impacts our lives? And if so, why?
Well, let us think about this term, gender-based violence. I mean, sometimes that means violence against women, and we understand what women are. Gender-based violence can also mean attacks on gay men in the street. That's gender-based. They're not doing their gender right. They are suffering gender discrimination. They are suffering gender violence. The rape of butch lesbians in South Africa, that is a gender-based, that is an example of gender-based violence. We could simply say they are being raped because they are women, but let's look closely. They're being raped in part because they are not conforming to the idea of women. Now, of course, women who are conforming get raped. Women who are not conforming get raped. You know, it's not as if rapists discriminate, but they do attack people for very specific reasons. And in this case, in South Africa, those who have been raping butch lesbians say that they are trying to correct their gender, right? That woman who's very masculine, who's a lesbian, needs to be corrected, needs to be raped precisely to remind her that that her proper place is within a heterosexual relationship where men have full power over her body. Okay, so if we want to describe gender-based violence correctly, and if we want the alliance between feminism and LGBTQI and queer movements, we actually need to understand why do people suffer violence on the basis of their sexual orientation, right? It may be that their gender is non-controversial, but their sexual orientation, once known, makes them subject to violence. Now, that violence, it seems to me, is connected to the violence done against a gay man who looks non-gender conforming, who's just walking on the street. I mean, and a woman who is raped or assaulted or harassed. We need to make the connection among these issues without deciding that this violence is worse than that violence. No, the minute we start doing that, we are lost. We are totally lost. Violence is equally horrific, no matter what form it takes, when people are targeted for their bodies, the perception of their bodies, the perception of their gender, when they are being told through sexual violence that they are nothing or that they are property. So power relations are everywhere, but let's remember that power relations, not only the patriarchal power relations, seek to put women in their place and make them into objects or property of men, and model marriage, in fact, on property relations of that kind. But that is related to the policing of gender on the street, the policing of sexuality on the street, that happens when rapists decide it is their right to attack bodies on the basis of their gender appearance or their presumptive sexuality. These are interrelated struggles, and I think that the idea of gender-based violence cannot just describe women assigned female at birth. It needs to include trans women. It needs to include gay and lesbian and queer peoples, and all peoples who are discriminated against or violated on the basis of their gender or their sexuality. For me, that's the alliance I want. That's the alliance I struggle for.
Very strong answer. Thank you. The questions are so, I mean, there's so many questions. Nevros, what do we do?
Actually, I don't know. Shall we just ask Judith Butler? Or, I mean, we can send her as well. She can read too, if you want, the English ones. By the way, some of our friends just ask questions. They raised their hands. I took their names as notes. If you want, I can ask them to ask their questions for a while, then we can continue to the questions. How do you think about that?
I think that would be a good idea. Maybe I could check the other questions and see if I can regroup them in the meantime.
Okay.
Okay.
So I would like to start with Merva Özcan. Merva raised her hand and she wanted to ask a question. Merva, can you hear me?
Evet, duyuyorum.
So you can ask your question. Sorunu sorabilirsin.
Ben sormak istiyordum. Judith Butler, genel olarak ittifak, zaten queer'in aslında ittifak amaçlı olduğunu ve ittifak için mücadele edeceğini söyledi. Feminizm hareketine, kadın hareketine baktığımızda ikili cinsiyet üzerinden hep bir mücadele yürüdü. Günümüzde de aslında yavaş yavaş bu aşılsa bile hala bir kadın hareketi ayrı, diğer cinsiyetler, cinsel kimlikler ayrı bir şekilde bir mücadele devam ediyor. Şunu sormak istiyorum, bu mücadelenin etkili olabilmesi için en iyi ittifak yolu nedir? Yani bu cinsiyetlerin, kimliklerin birleşmesi mi hepsini kuvvetlendirir veya ayrı ayrı birbirlerini güçlendirerek devam etmeleri mi? Yani birleşmek örneğin kadın hareketini zayıflatır mı veya örneğin gay hareketini zayıflatır mı? Öyle söyleyeyim.
So thank you, Merva. I'm going to do a summary translation. So basically the question was about your suggestion that queer is about alliance. It's not an identity, it's about affiliation and alliance. So the question sort of contrasts feminism with that politics of alliance, and says feminism has been so far sort of also been based on two binary construction of gender. So the should feminism still be a movement that is somehow separated from the queer sort of movement? Should they follow two different paths, or should their paths cross? If they do come together and sort of, you know, join their paths, wouldn't that harm each movement in itself?
Well, thank you. I see also that I do have a interpretation function here. Someone is also doing an interpretation for me there. So
Zeynep Hocam biz notları alırken sevgili Ceren sanırım çeviriyi yapmış. Aha, çok teşekkür ediyoruz bu arada. Siz devam ettiğiniz için bölmek istemedim.
Tamam.
Kocaman kalp.
Tamam. Okay.
okay, but that's great. Thank you so much. I needed both versions. I do not think that alliances weaken movements. Alliances are not the same as fusion or merging or becoming one, an undifferentiated unity. No. The women's movement has its goals, its autonomy, its principles, its aims. It's very important that it be able to meet and decide its autonomous future. Autonomy does not preclude, it does not exclude alliance. In fact, that is the struggle. Like, how do you make an alliance and keep your autonomy? The idea that an alliance would be, that a movement would be weakened through alliance, I think is based on the idea that the movement, the autonomous movement, would lose control or power if it were allied with somebody else. But alliance makes us stronger, and it intensifies the burden of self-definition. In other words, one must be very autonomous in order to be strengthened by an alliance rather than threatened by an alliance. But I mean, I have seen a number of women's movements ally with the Kurdish movement without taking the Kurdish movement over. Right? An alliance is a respect for, demands a respect for autonomy. That is not a contradiction. But autonomy, if it becomes so closed and so tight that it has no alliances, will weaken. Then it will weaken because it loses the support of the region, the world, the neighboring struggles, the intersecting struggles. And then it becomes closed in on itself and its separatism, and that can be enormously weak. So the question is how to maintain autonomy and well, what we call in philosophy relationality, the the relations to others that are so important, right? Like without global support, where is the Kurdish women's movement? I mean, it's incredibly autonomous. I follow, it's unbelievable. But at the same time, one wants that global support, and that also happens through alliances and through conversations that mark the commonalities and mark the differences. I can ally with somebody with whom I disagree on many issues, but there must be core issues on which we do agree. We don't have to love each other. We don't have to be totally the same. In fact, it's better if we're not. We're not the same. It's sometimes better if we don't love each other, right? I go to demonstrations with people I do not want to have dinner with, right? But the demonstrations are, and I stand next to them. It's okay. It's okay. I will do them. But alliances have friction. They have conflict. They have distance. They have difference. If an alliance threatens to overwhelm you, then it's not a good alliance, right? So one always has to be negotiating that issue, in my view.
Bu süre zarfında arkadaşlar ben aldım isimleri. Zeynep Hocam şimdi tekrar ileteceğim. Çevirmen arkadaşımız çevirecek. Size de zaten görselleri gönderiyorum. Şimdi Yasemin Öz'ü dinlemek istiyoruz. El kaldırıyor başından beri. Teşekkür ediyoruz.
Hey Judith and Zeynep. It's last time we were together. It is sorry, is there a problem with, I hear my voice back.
I hear you.
It's an interference.
Okay. Last time we were together. Crazy, I hear. Just give me a second.
In Ankara.
Yes, in 2007. We were all together. I have a lot of questions. Since I'm in the queer movement, I receive a lot. But I have to stop hearing my voice. How?
Dear Yasemin, if you want to just check your headphone.
Okay,
if
okay.
Yasemin, can you hear me? Your microphone is turned off. I said until you check your headphone, I can give the words to someone else. Is that okay for you?
Okay, do you hear me?
Yeah, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you a lot. No, I'm not okay with this computer. You know, from the start, as the queer movement in Turkey, we are not against only hierarchy of gender, but we are against of every kind of hierarchy and discrimination and violence against every type of identity, which is, I guess, which was the best way we chose to build allies to change this such a patriarchal country against homophobia and transphobia. But I'm still confused with a lot of questions I received from the society, especially from the LGBT movement and feminist movement. One of my questions is, I'm okay with non-binary, I guess. Thanks to you, Judith. It's always, thanks for asking this planet so much questions and offering new ways and giving that to me also. Sometimes I say I'm man, sometimes I say I'm woman. Thanks to you, whatever I like, in which mood I am. This is because of you. But I make it just to confuse the people. I'm not stable something. I don't have any identity. I'm okay with non-binary. That's okay. But if I say I'm a man in a biological woman's body, I guess it's another identity. And how can we solve this gender trouble with these identities? I'm confused with that. It's not because always you offer another identity, you suggest another identity. Non-binary is okay. The others are, they are all identities. This is something which we receive question about too much. And I don't have any proper answer. And another question is, the feminist movement in Turkey, like in Western countries, they ask private rooms sometimes for some issues close to biological man, even if they call themselves trans, because they feel like threatened. I understand the issue as a biological woman. They want private space to share their experiences or emotions, but we can never stop this fight between the LGBTI movement and the feminist movement until now, and it continues. My third question is,
Yasemin, yeah, there are so many
sometimes
people waiting, Yasemin.
Sorry?
There are so many people waiting for questions.
Sorry, my third question is, trans women began to call themselves, I'm a woman, not trans. I'm confused again because you don't have to be the normal one. You don't have to call yourself and be the same as the normal one. What do you think about these issues? Thank you a lot.
We thank you.
I'll try to be brief, although this is, as Yasmin knows, a very complex issue. It's lovely to see you again, by the way. Instead of talking about biological man, biological woman, maybe we could say that there is that we are assigned a sex at birth. And we're assigned that sex on the basis of what a doctor or a nurse or some authority thinks we look like, on the basis of sexual characteristics that are identifiable. But then as we go through life, we either accept that assignment or we struggle with that assignment. Some of us struggle with it, we feel ambivalent, we live with it, it's okay. We try to change the terms of what it means to be female, what it means to be a woman. And others say, no, this is not acceptable to me. I need to change the assignment. So I think of sex assignment as a process. It happens once, very important at birth. Sometimes it doesn't happen right away. If the infant is intersex, we know they have to wait and decide which sex should it be. But these are mechanisms of power, the hospital, medicine, law, that are telling us our sex. So sex assignment is already a determination of how to name our biological reality according to categories. It's an act of power, sex assignment. And it is also an act of reclaiming power to decide, no, that's not my assignment. I want to change that assignment. For some people, they can live with their sex assignment and they can move with it. It sounds like what you're describing as a queer mobility is possible for you, but for some trans people, it's not possible. It's not mobile. It's actually fixed. It's the wrong assignment and it needs to change. Some people understand trans as transitioning, as movement, as mobile. Some people understand trans as very fixed identity. So this is part of the complexity that we live with now in the world. We've probably always lived with it, but we haven't had a good vocabulary for it. For me, the only question is what makes your life livable? What makes you want to live? What gives you a place in this world? What language, what community allows you to live and to live well? And then how people answer that is really up to them. I don't want to be in the position ever of telling people that you can call yourself this, but you can't call yourself that. We don't need to police each other. We need communities that are open to the unexpected and the new, and that seek to make our lives more equal, more free, more livable. So that's how I approach it.
Thank you so much again. There are so many questions, there are so many people. I just try to reach all of them, and I just don't want to also make you feel tired. When you need a break or when you need to stop, just please tell me. And I want to call Gizem Atlı. I just wrote her name as well. She would like to ask you a question. Gizem Atlı, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you for the presentation. I have been reading the gender trouble, and my question is, why is it dangerous for feminists to rely on or try to establish woman as a universal category?
Well, it's not dangerous. I think as a feminist, we are always using the term woman. We need it for our analysis and for our activism. So I accept that. But is my definition of what a woman is the same as yours? We don't know. Maybe if we started to have that discussion, we would find that we have different views. And then the question is, well, do we need to agree on one view in order to proceed? Maybe not. Maybe we don't need to have agreement on what it means. Many feminists thought, oh, we must define what is essentially feminine or what belongs to all women in all places in the world. Well, I would be very reluctant, maybe because I am American, but I would be very reluctant to define what a woman is in every place in the world. I have a lot to learn about how the category of woman is defined in all places in the world, and I do learn all the time, and I'm amazed by the differences. And even when we talk about a system of patriarchy, patriarchy has different forms. So the patriarchal formation in Brazil is not the exact same as the patriarchal formation in China. And why should it be? We need to listen more to the historical specificities of our lives. Some cultures are more open about what is a woman. Others are less so. We have a wide range of views, and maybe this is the most important thing. When we ask the question, what does it mean to be a woman? We are not asking it of a dictionary or of an authority that will give us a settled answer. We are actually trying to open up the question, like, hey, you're telling me a woman can't do this. You're telling me a woman has to act this way or look this way. Well, what does it mean to be a woman? If I ask that question, I open up the possibilities for what it is, how a woman can love, how she can live, what word. So I think the category is being revised in time. It's historical. It changes all the time. And it's a good thing for feminism that it opens up over, oh, you can be a woman and do that, right? That moment of insight, illumination, it's great. But it shows us that the category of woman is historical, and we need it to be historical, not settled, not universal, not fixed.
Thank you so much.
Berk has been waiting for a long time. I would like to hear Berk's voice. Berk Korkmaz. I'm sorry.
Okay. No, it's fine. Hi. I had one question about where do you put masculinity and femininity in queer theory, but I guess we talked about it a little. So I'm going to ask my next question. I was wondering, yesterday I saw some post of this queer content creator on Instagram, and there's this comment saying to queer people as like, why does your personality revolve around only being queer? And I was just thinking about this as like queer people, us being queer, a part of our identities attacked in so many ways that focusing on protecting or defending that part sometimes I feel like takes over a lot of the things. And like, I was just wondering, is being queer, our struggles or the way we fight for them, a personality maybe? Or do you think is it actually that the world revolves around heteronormativity so much that being queer seems too much for people to even see it? Or like, what do you think of performative aspects of being queer being perceived as an actual personality?
Being perceived as what kind of personality?
Just a personality, a type of personality.
I don't know. It keeps changing, you know. I'm getting older, so I no longer even know who identifies as queer and who doesn't. So I'm the wrong generation for that question. I'm sorry. I love your question. I don't know how to answer.
I mean, I meant more like there's the queer culture, and we have a common sense in saying like, what is queer, what is our culture? We kind of get together around it. But then also, as we see it, I think also like straight people get around it as well, them being straight, and it's usually the center. But it's kind of, I mean, I've been thinking about my own trauma and how I center my queerness around my personality. And I guess it was kind of a personal question, like, where do you put your queerness and your personality? I don't know.
I don't know. For me, it's not so much personality. I don't know how to think about that. It's community. For me, it's community and solidarity and alliance. So it means everybody is different, and that my straight allies are crucial to me, right? Feminist allies, anti-racist allies, anti-imperialist allies. It's all beautiful. So I don't know about personality. That seems to bring it back to an individualism that maybe is less pertinent to my project, but I recognize what you're saying. If we could maybe take a last set of questions, I could take about 2 more. Is that okay?
We have 3 hands that are raised.
Okay, let's take 3.
Okay. And we have some questions with Zeynep Gambeti. So you can just tell me how should I go on?
It would be, I guess I would like to try to bring this to a close in about 10 minutes, if that's okay.
You want to have a break for 10 minutes, right?
Well, it depends. How long are we supposed to be going for?
Actually, we are already over of our time and plan, but just the questions are so good. They are so excited and they want to talk. If you need a break, I can just tell to everybody and we can give that break. 10 minutes later, we can meet again. But
just a 5-minute break, but then I do have another appointment coming up, so I'm not able to stay indefinitely. I'm sorry. But yes, give me a few minutes if you would. Thank you.
Okay. Zeynep Hocam.
5 dakika mı? Çok yoruldu galiba Nevroz'cum, onun için belki son 3 soruyu alırız 5 dakika sonra.
Bir başka görüşmem olacaktır yanlış anlamadıysam.
Evet. Ama bir de yoruldu galiba.
Evet.
Çok sağ böyle.
Hocam sizin de desteğiniz için teşekkür ederiz. Ben bu arada bütün arkadaşların isimlerini aldım. Not tuttum, soruların hepsini Zeynep Hocama da ilettim ama takdir edersiniz ki katılım fazla olduğu için arada yetişemeyeceklerimiz olacaktır.
Evet, yani sorular arasından ben böyle hani bakmaya çalıştım. Ben de o zaman bir 2 dakika kapatayım ekranı, bir daha bir bakayım. Biraz birleşik soracağım.
Tamam hocam.
Bir soru da benden gidecek o tarafa doğru. İstiyorsanız yeni soru almayalım.
Tamam hocam.
Tamam.
Hı. Ben bu arada bir hatırlatma yapmak istiyorum. Bizim bir değerlendirme formumuz olacak. Sizlerden rica edeceğiz. Arkadaşlarımız o değerlendirme formunu doldurmanızı isteyecek zaten. Birazdan chatten sizinle linki de paylaşmış oluruz. Çok uzun değil. Eğer doldurursanız en azından bizim raporlama kısmında da destekçimiz olur o link. Bu arada İngilizce konuşamadım şu an. Kusura bakmayın. Linkin formunu atıyoruz ve sizlerden rica ediyorum en azından beklerken doldurabilirseniz çok mutlu oluruz. Teşekkürler.